Dr. Joseph Ladapo is the Surgeon General of Florida and professor at University of Florida College of Medicine. He received his MD from Harvard Medical School and a PhD in health policy from Harvard Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. In Dr. Ladapo's new book, Transcend Fear, a blueprint for mindful leadership in public health, he describes his views on public health restrictions, early home treatment, and the COVID-19 vaccines. He also takes a look at how Florida officials made public health decisions that set the state apart from other states and nations. Based on this experience, Dr. Ladapo explains how states can make better public health decisions in the future, particularly during a crisis. And Dr. Ladapo joins us now with more on his fantastic book, which I think has a title that's really apropos, Transcend Fear, because there's just so much fear out there right now and people don't know what to do. Doctor.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of fear out there. And even though, fortunately, we're at a point where, at least from the pandemic perspective, there's less fear in the atmosphere, in the environment. Unfortunately, the work that will help us get separated from the underlying sort of bed of fear, which, by the way, will be attempts to exploit it will be made again. We're not, that wasn't the end. The same strategy of playing on people's fears, exploiting people's fears to essentially coerce their behavior, to draw certain behavior out of people, it's with us. So really getting to the underlying, again, that source is like, that's the work that we still need to do.
Well, I think right now, obviously the CDC came out with their recommendations, which I'm a little unclear of what a recommendation means and if that means the vaccine is mandatory for children. What is that all about and what should parents do?
Wow. What should parents do is an easy one. And basically, if you have a healthy kid, you should not be giving them these COVID-19 shots, because it has so unequivocally not been demonstrated that there are even any potential benefits for healthy children, but the benefits outweigh costs, outweigh the risks. So that's definitely what you should do. And in terms of the CDC and the FDA, it's like a kangaroo court at this point. They're approving vaccines on mouse data. They are seeing safety signals and pretending they're not there. It's like the whole can't see, can't hear, can't say anything with the three mice or whatever. And most recently, it's really stunning. It's hard to, I'm going to say this, and it sounds like I made it up because it's so ludicrous, but it's actually true. Moderna, in their clinical trial of children, including toddlers and older kids, the small kids still, they published a recent paper in the New England Journal of Medicine, I don't know, maybe a week and a half ago. And the FDA and the CDC, to the best of my, they, and there's trial, believe it or not.
I'm sorry, I just want you to repeat that. The FDA and the CDC, Moderna published this paper, and the FDA and CDC, what did they do?
Well, they have the data.
Okay.
And what Moderna published showed that in the toddler age group, something like 6 months to 23 months. So toddlers, babies, toddlers, 1 in 200 of those little kids had a serious adverse event. What is a serious adverse event? That has a formal definition. That includes hospitalization. It includes death. No one died, but hospitalization, serious medical conditions requiring acute medical care, very serious health conditions. 1 in 200 kids in the first 28 days. Guess how many kids had a serious adverse event in the placebo group? 0. So to give, it is insane. 1 in 200. There's not, I don't know of a vaccine in history that has anything near that rate of serious adverse events. That's insane. 1 in 200 healthy people to have a serious adverse event in 28 days, but they approved it. So what is going on there? It's not science. It's not public health. I don't know what it is, but parents, please keep that stuff away from your kids.
But the scary thing is that over the pandemic, we're relying on the FDA and the CDC and pharmacies to be our doctors. And I think for the most part, a lot of people are going to the doctors and the doctors are just saying, yeah, well, this is the guidance, get the shot.
Right.
And so many people just went and got the shot, including myself. And we really didn't know what we were getting or why or what was in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't from my doctor, it was like, I went personally, I went to the Jacob Javits Center. It was really, it was really an experience because you walk in there, it's like a football field. And it's not like I'm going into my doctor's office. I walk into the Jacob Javits Center. You have a time. There were all these little desks lined up with little like lamps, like banker's lamps. And you would go up to the desk, you'd give your information in, and then they would send you to another line. And there were all these folks from, they were just doing their job from I think they were from the National Guard, standing around. And then you would go to a table, you'd get the shot. I had no idea who was giving me the shot. And then you had to go sit with like 100 people and make sure that you didn't pass out. And then you were allowed to leave. And I was like, I left that. And I was like, well, what just happened here? I don't know what I just did, but it seemed weird. It seemed weird. I'm fine. I'm healthy. But that whole experience, I'm like, and I never talked to my doctor once. I just went and did it.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you.
I don't think the CDC or the FDA or Fauci or the people in charge realize how much damage they've done.
Perhaps not, but they one of the challenges, honestly, their objectives are very unclear. I and other people, for example, I totally have a public health objective. I'm in it for, I am absolutely in it for, because I think it's what's best for public health is, and for public health and for human beings in terms of being able to make choices that are informed and align with their values rather than being manipulated, things like that. But I truthfully do not know what their objectives are, because they're not behaving like people who have, they certainly don't behave like people who have those objectives in terms of public health and really supporting and loving and believing in the majesticity of who we are as human beings and our divineness and our connection to God and all that. That's definitely not part of their playbook.
I know you talk about the Navy SEAL whom you worked with. I think I'm going to have to do a lot of editing of this. The Navy SEAL who you worked with, it's a fascinating subject to me because I don't know if you've ever heard of this energy healer. His name is Rob Worgan. Have you heard of him before?
I haven't, but you got to know that I was not like into that world. So I don't really know anyone in that world, and I didn't believe in that world at all. And I don't know even if I do. I know that I worked with a guy who's the real deal, and he's changed. He allowed me to change my life. So I believe in him because I have firsthand experience with him. But I don't know that field really.
And you talk about that in your book. So what were your experiences and how did you get to know this gentleman who changed your life?
Well, for me, so I was a babysitter when I was a little kid, maybe around 4 years old, sexually molested me. And I remember it. I didn't think much of it after it happened, but I had a vivid memory, and I proceeded on with life, thinking that it happened, not a big deal. But what actually happened, I only found this out later, was that from getting away from it, was that it actually basically froze my heart and cut my choked off my ability to connect with other people. I had no idea. I thought everything was fine. And the beginning of that, to really understanding, and then getting free of what I had created for myself in terms of a emotional prison, was falling in love with my wife, which happened completely accidentally. Like I thought I knew what relationships were. I'd never had an intimate relationship before her. And with Brianna, we met on a plane. She was going to a different city. And so, but we talked for the whole flight. And so I asked her for her phone number in Newark at the connecting flight. And when she was headed to San Diego and I was going up to Boston back to medical school, and we ended up talking we just would talk on the phone, and we would talk and we would talk. And eventually we would talk for like 9 hours. Like I would see the sun come up in Boston while staying on the phone with her. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was falling in love with her. And so she came through the back door of my heart, if you will, which was the only way to get in, because I didn't know it, but I was incapable of having an intimate relationship with someone who I was like dating. That was not possible. But this girl that I was talking with on the phone, and just talking and talking and talking, when the distance made physical intimacy, physical contact, not even something to consider. It allowed me to, whatever the heck was there, go down, and I fell in love with her. But the thing about love, of course, for anyone who's been in love and has some degree of self-honesty, is that when you fall in love, all your stuff that's that's below comes to the surface, because that's how love is. It brings it all up. So we had a really explosive emotional time, because I had all this unbelievable junk, like not pretty stuff, that I had tucked away in some closet in my subconscious, and locked away, and thought it would be safe there for the rest of my life. I would have died that way if I hadn't fallen in love with Brianna. But instead, it all came up. And of course, I loved her. So there was the only way to keep that love was to go through it. And with therapy, and it helped. It definitely helped.
And on the outside, but on the outside, here you are, this Harvard trained doctor, researcher. By all accounts, you're off the charts.
Oh, sure. Totally. Inside, I was a mess, and I was small, and I was afraid, and I was I was hiding, because I was afraid of the world. And and it eventually, my poor wife, and she told me one day, like in October of 2019, she said, Joe, she said, I found someone for you, someone who's special. Because I could never see it, but she always knew. And she's really gifted with intuition. She knew that the root of my problems was my encounter with the babysitter. I couldn't really see it, because I just kept feeling like, it happened, big, for whatever. And it wasn't a big deal. But she always felt that was it. And she said one day, she came home, I still remember, she's like, Joe, I found someone for you. He specializes in helping people who've had trauma. And she was so far gone, I had no choice but to go along with it. And I wanted help, but it was super expensive, and I didn't want to spend the money. He wrote for Maher is his name. And he wrote a book called Free for Life. I talk to him, I get the book, I read the book. The book's out there, but I get the vibe, I get a sense that he knows what he's talking about. So I go and see him, and he has an apartment in Marina Del Rey. And basically what we ended up doing that week was we did a lot of stuff, but ultimately what it what it is a combination of different physical manipulations, some of them often very painful, but it's fascinating. The pain, like one of them, Malshing, and it's a mix of Chinese medicine and meridian theory and other stuff. And Malshing, you lay down, face down, and he walks on the back of your thighs, I think over a meridian. And it's extremely painful initially. Like it's like 9 out of 10 pain. It's extremely painful. But eventually the pain, it goes down, it goes down, it goes down. And then eventually the pain is gone. And what's happening, it actually feels pleasurable. It feels like, oh, this feels good, like I'm having a massage. And what's happening is that, and that's just one muscle group. What's happening is that all of us, every single living human being on this planet, the stress that we feel every day, like the stress, trauma, the agitation, anxiety, shame, all that stuff. It sounds crazy, but it's totally true. We store it in our bodies and we store it in our tissues. And what's happening is when the pain is going down, your muscles, your tissues are releasing the stuff that they're, and eventually, when it's released all that it can release, you don't feel pain anymore. And the wonderful thing about that is that it means that your chi can flow. And that's like just one meridian, but that's that same story with different types of physical manipulations happens all over the body. And so you get, the more flow you have, the more pain gets out of your body that's stored in there from all the stuff that we accumulate, like the more freedom you have. You can be free from fear. You can be free from shame. You can be free from self-doubt. You can be free from agitation. Everyone's different in terms of where they store different things, but all of us, it's stored in our bodies. It sounds crazy. I didn't believe it was possible, but it's totally true. He's actually worked with tens of thousands of people. And honestly, as much as I was complaining about the money, I would drop every penny I had for what I got. I mean, you cannot put a price on it. I was complaining, you can't put a price on it.
Can you tell me a little bit about the research that you did related to myocarditis in young men?
Basically, what we found was that for young men specifically, there was a marked increased risk in cardiac deaths in the 28 days following vaccination. And that was really the main finding. And it's why I issued the recommendation that they not get it. And its method is imperfect. There are biases in the study that bias the estimate of risk upward. There are also biases that potentially bias the estimate of risk downward. So it's not perfect, but the only group that showed this very pronounced signal, and it also happens to be the only group where both myocarditis and subclinical myocarditis is almost certainly a major concern. So I think at this point in the pandemic, it's kind of crazy for folks to be recommending this vaccine for young men, considering huge question mark at this point in the pandemic, huge question mark. Everybody's had COVID just about, but the risks don't change. The risks of the vaccine don't change. So the calculus changes. So that was our recommendation.
I think right now a lot of people have a lot of regrets about getting the vaccine, or they don't want to get the booster. People are freaked out that they took the vaccine. They don't know what it may do in the future. What's your recommendation?
Well, I think my recommendation is that I wish our health authorities federally would be honest. It would make a lot of things easier. And specifically, you may be familiar with some of these, but beyond myocarditis, right? There's already evidence of changes in menstrual cycles. Mm-hmm. They're labeled as temporary. How the hell is it happening? There's data on changes in sperm counts and sperm motility. It is temporary. Not clear that they're temporary, by the way, looking at the data from this paper in Andrology that published it. But again, why in heaven's freaking name is it happening? And there's Bell's palsy. There's a signal for increased risk of appendicitis. And then there are other concerns too. So the risks, I mean, those are just the known unknowns. I mean, there are unknown unknowns too. And I suspect we'll continue to learn more. I think that one needs to make the decision at this point, considering the fact that almost everyone has had COVID and Omicron is less than prior strains. And there's a lot that's uncertain and unknown about these vaccines.
And then all these people are canceled, including yourself. I mean, how do you fight back against that?
It is really difficult and annoying. I can't even actually complain of being canceled because we put out a factual tweet. Like literally, we did an analysis. This is what we found. Here's our recommendation. All facts. And they ended up reverting their pulling down of the tweet, which was to be concerned that these companies are working to control people's access to information. Like that's an enormous concern. Beyond the fact that they're seen to be doing it in cahoots in conjunction with the government, but it is difficult, and I really admire Naomi Wolf. I admire Robert Malone because they stick with it. And the thing is, I have no doubt, the truth will continue to shine and continue to come out. And I think that doing is exactly the thing to do. They just keep talking. You cancel me here, I'll keep talking over there. And people get it. And look, there's no trust. People, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Walensky, urging people to take them. No one's taking these vaccines. Uptake is so low. And why is that? Because people do not trust you. And I'm glad they don't. Because unfortunately, you've lied to them. And you've been doing it from the beginning. Remember natural immunity? Denying that for a year and a half or something? It's just, how do you trust them? You shouldn't trust people that are so cavalier with your trust. You shouldn't.
And your health, that's the whole thing that is so maddening about this, because when you think health, you can't even conceive, most regular people can't conceive that anyone in authority would lie to you regarding your medical health. But it just went out the window. And I just didn't understand with like the ivermectin, people were doing studies and people were getting better with that, and it was shut down, left, right. No, you can't hear about that. It's just insane.
I totally agree. And, I actually know more about hydroxychloroquine than ivermectin. And I do think that using hydroxychloroquine early reduces the risk of COVID hospitalization based on the synthesis of the data, which basically show a lot of benefits that are non-significant, but across multiple studies, I think that it's likely that it's a real signal. I know less about ivermectin, but at the very least, let doctors who believe they're having benefits from it, why are you getting in their way? Why do you have to make it sort of talk about horses as if it's not a human medication and basically shame people into not using it? It's all part of the disheartening propaganda campaign.
Well, to wrap things up, I would like to talk about the money factor in all of this. Can you give us an idea of the money structure and the flow regarding government and the pharmaceutical industry and doctors so that we have a better understanding of what's happening?
Yeah, so there is a great book by the premier journal around the world. And her book, I believe, is called The Truth About Drug Companies. And it's very revealing. Now, this is a woman who was the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. And basically what she writes about is the corruption of medical science because of the pharmaceutical industry. I've read her book. I think it's an excellent book. It was very eye-opening for me. And the picture it paints is a pharmaceutical industry puts money over everything, which I don't blame them for. They're privately owned. They get to do that. But unfortunately, they have managed to swindle the cooperation of government officials, of lawmakers, through strong lobbying, through and of doctors, through all this pharmaceutical detailing and whining and dining doctors and getting them to represent their products, and also through media, from what I can see. And she doesn't know much about this in her book, but it's been my observation that it is hard. And even if people think that they can't, I don't. I think that they're overestimating on average their ability. It's hard to be objective when you're taking money from people, and when drug companies are sponsoring your news media. How objective can you be when, for example, a study about myocarditis that you can get done in a month, Pfizer drags its feet for a year and a half, 2 years, and we're still waiting for data on subclinical myocarditis. How can you objectively, or when I just mentioned that study that was published, 1 in 200 rate of serious adverse events in toddlers. Like, it's when you're taking money from them, can you cover the bad things objectively? They're can't do that. So that the money piece that's inherent to the pharmaceutical industry from everything I've seen. I mean, they behave as a greed operation, which again they have a right to. It's ugly, but unfortunately they've co-opted the cooperation of lawmakers, this direct to consumer advertising and commercials, the whining and dining of doctors and clinicians, the whining and dining of doctors. And it just makes for it contributes to this kind of situation where people are recommending new vaccine products without evidence of benefit over risk. They're just literally making stuff up. Don't like. So it's definitely corrupt. It's corrupt at this point.
Do you think anyone will be held accountable? And if so, when?
I don't know. Honestly, I think what's more important is that we move to where we should be. And I do think we're going to get there. And I think that they probably will be, because I think a lot of people have experienced, for example, adverse effects or have had loved ones who've experienced adverse effects and feel that they're being told that it's essentially all in their head, or it couldn't possibly be related to these vaccine products or whatever. And I there will be some justice there. But the most important thing from a policy perspective and a public health perspective is that we get out of this game. It's just a terrible game. Everyone loses except for the drug companies for now. And it's so demoralizing. We just let's just stick that behind us.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. The book, again, Transcend Fear, and you give us so much hope. And with hope, I think that we can lessen the fear. I think a lot of people are walking around with some level of fear. And I think it's until we're able to talk about what's happened over the past 2 years and where we go from here, that's the point I think we can move forward. And it's really moving forward in a spirit of truth and hope. Well, thank you so much again for joining us today. And I hope we can talk again soon.
It's been such a pleasure.